Thanks for joining us today here in the Building 9 mock-up facility. With us, veteran astronaut Mike Fink, who has spent more days in space than any other U.S. astronaut, and who has had the privilege of launching twice and landing twice in this vehicle, the Russian Soyuz spacecraft. Mike's going to take us through a little walk on each of the sections of the Soyuz today before we go inside for a look-see. Mike?
Rob, it's great to be here, and it's great to get a chance to talk about one of my favorite spacecraft, the Soyuz. It comes in three parts. It's a classic spacecraft, a capsule-based design. So in the middle part, let's talk about that first. That's where we sit in for launch and landing. So we call that the crew module. And right above it, we have the habitation module, so that when we actually get into space, we need a little bit more room so we're not cramped in that little can. So we have the habitation module. And a third module below is the instrumentation module, which has extra things like oxygen and our engines and things like that. Now, just before landing, all three of these modules separate, and only the part in the middle where we're sitting is the one that comes back home.
Well, let's take a look inside, Mike.
Yeah, come on inside. Rob, this is a mock-up of a Soyuz model TMA, and the A part came in the late 90s, early 2000s, when we put in this new glass cockpit, the Neptune panel. And so we're sitting down. I'm sitting down in the flight engineer spot, which is at the left seat, and then there is the center seater, who is the commander, and then you're sitting in the right seater position, which is either another flight engineer number 2, or a space flight participant. So you can see on that side there are fewer buttons to push and fewer things to control. So usually the spacecraft is flown with the commander and the flight engineer, which is more like a co-pilot working together. And since the center seat is depressed a little bit lower, it's harder for the commander to actually push the buttons. So either he uses a stick like this, or oftentimes, the way that I've flown it is as a flight engineer, I push all the buttons, I set everything up, commander agrees or disagree, and then we execute. You can see there's a screen right here that's a periscope that looks out either in front of the vehicle or below us, as well as some control sticks here so we can actually manually fly from the center seat.
So let's say we're at the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. It's launch day. The crew has had breakfast at their resident crew quarters. You've gone out into the Cosmodrome to suit up, and now you're at the launch pad. How do you get inside this efficient vehicle and get settled in for the rest of the countdown?
The launch pad that I launched off of twice was Yuri Gagarin's launch pad. And how cool is that to have people from all over the world, including Americans, launching from Yuri's launch pad. So about 2.5 hours before launch, we arrive by bus, already dressed in our spacesuits. We climb up a ladder to the gantry, take a small elevator up to the tippy top, and the rocket doesn't look so big from below, but when you're up there up at the tippy top of the rocket looking down, it's a big rocket. We come in through the living and habitation module, and there's a hatch right up here that we actually come through. So the hatch that you see behind us doesn't really exist. It's great for the mock-up. So we send down usually the flight engineer first, then over to the flight engineer number 2 or space flight participant, and then this commander comes in last. We close the hatch, we turn on the panels, we turn on the spacecraft, make sure all the systems are working, do our communications checks, and then we sit back and let the ground team do their job.
The Soyuz booster rocket that the spacecraft is perched on top of is fully fueled, ready to go. What are some of the things that take place, let's say, in the final 30 minutes or so before liftoff?
Usually, up to that point, we have been relaxing. If all the comm checks went well, the pressurization of the capsule, our suit checks, if that all goes well, then we're just sitting down relaxing. And sometimes they even put in some music. And it's very amazing to sit there on the steppe of Kazakhstan listening to maybe some American jazz right before a launch. So about half an hour, though, we get our head back in the game, and we make sure all of our systems are functioning properly. Do some more comm checks with the ground, make sure that they hear us. They'll give us an update, and then by that time, it's time to go. and it's just starting to, you can't believe, because up to that point you say, wow, I've been training for years, ready to go, and you can see the little counter start to go down a little bit. So, oh my goodness, it's going to happen, and then you hear a few thumps or bumps outside as the gantry moves, and you're standing there all by yourself, and then you can feel the vibration of the engine start to launch. And then the beauty of it all, 8.5 minutes later, you're in orbit. It's that fast.
And then, Mike, conversely, after about 6 months in orbit, it's time to come home at some point, back to Kazakhstan. Walk us through the preparations that you all do when it's time to undock, and give us a little glimpse of what that entry is all about.
We close the hatch between we get back in our spacesuits, then we close the hatch to the living habitation module. We get back here in the crew module, the descent module, and we're all in our spacesuits again. We make sure that this hatch, especially the one between the living habitation module and the crew module here, is very fully sealed, because all of a sudden that hatch is going to be the one to the outside, because our 3 compartments break apart. So we get ready for undocking to the space station. We're in our spacesuits, everything's good, and we watch the undocking. It's all automatic. We make sure that we're pointing away from we pull away from the space station, make sure we get out of the space station's way, and we check out all of our systems to make sure that we can come back home safely. Again, it's always about checking out our systems. It's really tricky because we're going 17,500 miles an hour, and we're going to go back to 0, and we're going to do that by breaking through the air. That means using the air to slow us down. Generates a lot of heat. Our heat shield not just glows, it actually melts off. It's an ablative heat shield. Our whole capsule is coated in it, and it's just amazing, because once we do our deorbit burn, that's really important. It takes about 3 minutes to slow down, but once we hit the atmosphere and start to slow down, it's just an amazing ride. You can look right out the windows and you can see the ablative heat shields melting. You can see the plasma ball that you're traveling through, and you're slowing down. And we start hitting the atmosphere like in Central Africa, and by the time we reach Central Asia, as we travel north and east, we're slowed down enough that parachutes can pop out, and we drift gently to the earth below.
But that parachute deployment is almost like the e-ticket of the ride, isn't it?
Well, that's definitely, I know some rides at amusement parks where people pay money for that. Because our parachute, because we have this hatch here, our parachute's actually off to the side. So when it first pops out, we kind of swing around in a big arc, and we haven't had gravity for a long time, and all of a sudden we're swinging around in a big circle. So and that comes right after, after the screaming in through the atmosphere and braking up to pulling up to 6 Gs, and all of a sudden we're spinning around with the parachute. But then the parachute repositions itself, and it then becomes a kind of a normal parachute, and we slow down, and then it's a gentle drifting. But until then, it's pretty exciting. Until the last meter or so, the last 3 feet, is when we meet the ground. We're going about 20 miles an hour at the time, and we hit the earth firmly, and we know that we're back home.
There are engines that fire right a split second before touchdown, almost strangely named soft landing engines, but we're relying on what would be custom seat liners that have some cushion capability for you, right?
It's the Russian designers have tried to make it as safe as possible so that we can come back safely and gently, so nobody gets hurt. So they do slow us down with our retro rockets right in the last meter or so. These seats actually, right before landing, in fact, that's how you know that you're getting close to the ground. They kind of position up so they would so that as soon as we land, the shock absorber takes the bulk of the impact.
Now, once you're down on the ground, those of us who have been flying in helicopters, Russian helicopters, in a racetrack pattern around the landing site waiting for you, we will land in sequential fashion, and then the process begins to extract the crew. Take us through that.
Well, it's always comforting, because on the way down, especially under the parachutes, we're able to talk to the pilots of the airplanes and the helicopters, so they know where to find us. And that's very comforting to know once we hit the ground that there's going to be someone there to meet us. So after we hit the ground, we actually have a switch on the commander's side here that cuts the risers to the parachute so the wind isn't pulling us around. and we sit there and wait carefully. And then this hatch, which used to go up to another module, now opens up to the outside. The ground rescue team opens it up and takes us out. Of course, it's kind of crowded in here, so sometimes they have to move some payload or some of our survival equipment out of the way first, and then they pull out the commander, and then the flight engineer number 2, and then, of course, last but not least, me, the flight engineer.
It must be almost a sensory overload after 6 months in a vacuum environment, basically, up on the space station. The smell of fresh air, the look of the grass, the smell of the dirt down in Kazakhstan. What are those sensations like for you?
All of those sensations, Rob, are heightened by our emotional feeling of coming back home. And as they say in the movies, there's no place like home. And you're coming back to Earth, you're coming back to gravity. All these things, they're not new to us, but we haven't had them in a while. So it's kind of like rediscovering things all over again, rediscovering the sense of smell and how beautiful it smells in the outdoors on the steppe. How it is to they hand us an apple right after we land, just to give us a taste, a scent of Mother Earth.
Back on Earth, Mike, and we appreciate your time as always, and thanks for walking us through a trip in the Soyuz.
I'm really glad to be able to share this great adventure with all of our viewers out there. You're watching NASA TV.